and I'm hoping that I'll be able to set the kind of tone for the day. I don't actually anticipate taking as long as 30 minutes to do this, so there'll be a little longer break for you after I finish speaking and before the workshops begin. So I advise you to use it wisely and go and get some more breakfast or some more coffee. A good place, I guess, to start talking about writing for pleasure is to explain what it actually is, because it's a phrase and an idea which is open to several different and actually quite dissimilar interpretations. But for us, and in the context of this conference, it has a very specific, a very special meaning. We've written a book about it called Writing for Pleasure, Theory, Research and Practice. And the book explains what it means to us and how it can be realized as what we believe to be a much needed pedagogy, a pedagogy which we also call writing for pleasure. So in our definition, a writing for pleasure pedagogy is nothing less than world-class writing teaching. When children are taught using world-class writing practices, we know they write for pleasure to a profound degree. So, how do we define world-class writing teaching? When world-class writing teaching is happening, teachers and children together develop strong writer identities in the classroom. When it's happening, children feel confident and competent. When it's happening, children have a strong desire and urge to write. When it's happening, children feel they have personal control over their writing. When it's happening, children are deeply motivated to share their words, and so work hard to craft meaningful and successful texts. World-class writing teaching is essentially the kind of teaching in which children's affective needs are being met, when their emotions and feelings are seen as crucially important to their development as writers. When this happens, children go on to achieve exceptionally well academically. So what gave us the impetus to take up the idea of writing for pleasure and ultimately write the book? We knew from research carried out in the UK by the National Literacy Trust that for many years now, there's been a decline in children's enjoyment of writing and in their motivation to write both in and out of school, with many children expressing indifference to, or even an active dislike of writing. And in addition, evidence has shown that too many students in England have been underachieving in writing. As recently as 2019, for example, it was reported that only 1 in 5 children were achieving above the basic level in writing. So we did feel confident in concluding that there is a significant link between lack of enjoyment and underachievement in writing. From our own and others' research, we've established that there are more specific connections to be made between children's enjoyment, their achievement, and their affective needs, with affective needs right at the centre. It seems that for a long time, little attention has been paid by educators to the feelings, emotions, and attitudes of young apprentice writers. And there's no doubt that this negatively impacts on their enjoyment of writing. Children don't develop or see themselves as writers when their affective needs haven't been met. And this in turn has a negative influence on their writing achievement. We see this as a really pernicious cycle of cause and effect. And so we were moved to write our book in the hope of taking the first step towards turning this tide of unhappiness and underachievement. I think it was around 2016, when we were still classroom teachers, we started to question our own writing teaching. In the course of our careers, we tried quite a few of the major approaches to writing teaching in our classroom. We tried the presentational skills approach. We tried the literature-based approach. We tried the genre approach, and what's rather amusingly called the naturalistic or romantic approach. Each one of these approaches had its strengths, but each one had its weaknesses. We decided to focus on the strengths of each orientation and to work to minimize the weaknesses. And in the process of doing this, we felt we had created a whole new pedagogy, a writing for pleasure pedagogy. Incidentally, if you want to know more about these various approaches, we describe them all in the first chapter of the book. We think you'd find it very interesting reading, and that you'd almost certainly recognize many aspects there of the way in which you were taught writing yourselves. So, what do we mean by pleasure? We defined it in two ways. There's writing as pleasure and writing for pleasure. So writing as pleasure is feeling a need to write and experiencing the fun and enjoyment in practicing the craft of writing, feeling confident and happy when engaging with the different processes of writing, enjoying being part of a writing community, discussing their own writing and how it feels to be a writer. And then there's writing for pleasure, having a sense of purpose fulfilled, the expectation of a reaction and a response, sharing something to be proud of and feeling you've achieved something significant, and the discovery of your own writing voice. In the early days, we wrote what we called a Writing for Pleasure manifesto, where we defined these two types of pleasure first. I especially like the second one, writing for pleasure. So I'll elaborate on it a little bit. It's the type of pleasure that comes after the act of writing. It's knowing that you'll get a response from your audience and that your writing will be put to work, sharing your memories, knowledge, ideas, thoughts, artistry, or opinions with others. There can also be pleasure in hearing the different meanings that others might take from your text. And pleasure can also come from listening to your own writing voice, from knowing that you said what you meant to say, or achieving what you meant your reader to feel. Writing for pleasure, therefore, gives children a sense of empowerment and the sense that writing has enriched their own lives and the lives of others. Well, initially, our main focus was on children writing as pleasure and writing for pleasure. And this was confirmed for us because we'd read that when children enjoy writing, they're 7 times more likely to write above the expected standard than those who don't. We'd also read that children who don't enjoy writing are 8 times more likely to write below the expected standard. So writing for, as, and with pleasure just seemed massively important. And what we wanted then, of course, was for the children in our class to write for and with enjoyment, and for the satisfaction and pride that comes from producing something significant, successful, and meaningful. We also wanted to see if at the same time we could achieve exceptional academic progress. And we were actually able to show that indeed, when children wrote as and for pleasure, their academic performance improved remarkably. Over time, we deepened our understanding of children's affective needs, and we got a better handle on what enjoyment and satisfaction actually mean in the context of a writing classroom. Through our own action research and from our reading of the research of others, we noted that the following affective domains were repeatedly mentioned as part of the most effective practices. So we have self-efficacy at the bottom, we have agency, self-regulation, volition, writer identity, motivation, which is slightly different from volition, all contributing to writing for pleasure. We continued to investigate and use writing practices which had a consistent reputation for attending to these needs, and we began to write about it online. Gradually, other teachers began to reveal themselves as writing for pleasure teachers too, and you'll be meeting some of them in one of the workshops this morning. In 2019, we were lucky enough to be given a grant to investigate what these other writing for pleasure teachers were doing in their classrooms that was making the difference. The difference being securing exceptional academic progress and their children loving being writers. The study confirmed that the most exceptional teachers focused their instruction on addressing and developing children's affective needs. And these teachers used the most effective writing practices to do it. And finally, we became totally convinced, and we remain totally convinced, that if there isn't a rich combination of both rigorous instruction in the craft of writing and attention to children's affective needs, children will never become the confident and competent writers that we all want them to be. Another part of our work was to look at many research studies, meta-analyses and case studies which described effective writing teaching. What emerged from all this reading were these 14 principles of world-class writing teaching. So we have some more general ones at the top. Create a community of writers in your classroom. Treat every child as a writer. Read, share, think, and talk about writing. And then the purple ones are the more sort of specific ones, which you can enact in the classroom. Pursue purposeful and authentic writing projects. And there's a lot to be said about what authentic means, because it looks like there are many different opinions about what authentic is. Teach the writing processes. That means everything, starting with generating an idea, drafting, revision, editing, and finally publishing. All those need to be specifically taught. Then there's set writing goals. That's one of the most effective instructional strategies that you can enact. Be reassuringly consistent. Pursue personal writing projects. A lot more to be said about that really on another occasion. Personal also has very different connotations for different people. Balance composition and transcription. Teach daily mini lessons. And then be a writer teacher. So incredibly important. Pupil conferencing, meeting children where they are. Don't give them written feedback the day after. Try and give it to them on the spot. Literacy for pleasure. Connect reading and writing. And the 14th principle, of course, is that all these principles are interconnected. So these are the principles that we saw writing for pleasure teachers using in their classrooms. These principles are what drives the writing for pleasure pedagogy. And the theory, research, and practice which underpin each one is given its own dedicated chapter in our book. Well, what we've done in the book is begin with an overview and a critical reflection of all the major approaches to teaching writing and how aspects of them inform a writing for pleasure pedagogy. Then we go on to focus on each of the affective domains that we showed you in the pyramid and their relationship to effective practice. Then we introduce the 14 enduring principles of world-class writing teaching, and we give a detailed exploration of each principle. And finally, to end with, we set out an extensive action plan for world-class writing teaching, which we want to see gain ground in the UK, but which is as yet, I'm afraid, a long way from being realised. We feel our achievement has been to be the first in the UK to draw together what so much research has been telling us for such a long time about the most effective writing teaching practices, and to use the research to then develop the idea of writing for pleasure and to show how it can transform classroom practice in the most positive ways. As I said at the beginning of this talk, the theory of writing for pleasure embodies everything we currently know about what constitutes world-class writing teaching. We don't know it all yet, and so we are determined to go on reading and observing, investigating and writing, always with a view to refining and improving our understanding. In the meantime, it's our great hope that through dissemination of the principles and practices of writing for pleasure, as many children as possible will come to receive world-class teaching and grow as a generation of extraordinary writers. This, after all, is what they deserve. I thought I'd end by quoting a short passage from the preface to our book, because it encapsulates our most profound beliefs about teaching both the writer and the writing. And it also captures the spirit of writing for pleasure. So here it is. Writing for pleasure is a robust and rigorous pedagogy. It doesn't advocate for a creative writing approach, though it encourages children to write creatively. It doesn't call for a return to a growth, naturalistic or romantic conception of writing, though it does want children to grow as writers. It wants children to learn about linguistic and literary features, grammar and punctuation, but in such a way as to help them craft meaningful and successful texts. It wants children to write in an environment of collective responsibility, but also to be able to develop their own individual voice. Finally, it wants children to learn the behaviours, dispositions, knowledge, skills, and techniques of writers, to write with purpose, power, precision, and pleasure, and to write for life. And running underneath all this like an underground stream is the conviction that we as teachers should be helping children to see writing not as being directed solely towards a set of efficient outcomes, but as an enterprise in which they can and should express their values, ideals, and aspirations. Well, I hope I've shown you what writing for pleasure means in the deepest sense, and that's to say in our sense, and that you'll see why we as practitioners simply can't afford to ignore all its implications for our teaching. A little bit of advertising here. If you're interested in reading our book, which is very accessible, you'll see on the screen that Routledge have kindly offered a discount code of 20%, as long as you order the copy through their website. And that concludes my presentation for this morning. We have now got something like 20 minutes, I think, before the workshops convene at 10:30. So thank you very much for listening. And I will see some of you this afternoon, no doubt, in the workshops. So thank you.
So if people want to go and get themselves a nice coffee, brekkie, do your yoga, of course. We've got to do our yoga, do our, daily exercise. Now's your time. Thank you, everyone.